Good morning. Welcome, everyone. This is Angela Coulter, your Consciousness Transformation Ascension Guide, originator of Trinity Energy Progression, bringing you this week's Living the Shift. It's funny because this topic came to me at 4:30 this morning. I woke up and it was there. And it is it's probably one of the most important topics to really open up discussion on right now, because there's a lot that's going on. And there's so much polarity, so much anger and righteousness and all kinds of stuff that is causing us to be in this place of me versus you, or us versus them. And so this is really, really important because good morning, Anne. Let's back up. Let's back up several months. Let's back up to like February or January, before all of this craziness happened in our world. And let's look at what we were talking about spiritually before then, right? So many who are in this place who've been practicing spirituality for decades or years or months, doesn't even matter. We've been talking about the importance of coming to this place of unconditional self-love, right? And that sounds really froofy and it sounds really oversimplified, and I can check that off on a Sunday afternoon. And yet it is the core exercise for us in coming through this period of awakening and realization and remembrance that we are all the divine, we are all facets of the divine embodied as we are, and that we're all perfect in our embodiment for what it is we've chosen to come here to do and the lessons we've chosen to come here to have, right? So in the bigger span and the bigger piece of consciousness, where we're looking at how to see and remember beyond the ego, right? How to do the Buddhist, I posted something this morning about the benevolent detachment, right? Being in this world and not of it. And coming to this place of recognizing that anything based in duality is from the ego. And that's what the ego, my understanding, that's how the ego has been tasked to explore, right? Separation and exclusion, right? And separation. Because when you have separation, you have exclusion, because you have this and not that, right? And you always have equal and balanced opposites. So we've had this huge entire existence based on deciding what good and evil is, and good and bad, and light and dark, and all that kind of stuff. And so when we talk about coming back into, remembering ourselves as higher consciousness, as the divine, we have been talking for many years about that importance of transcending the idea of, just being the light and not being the dark, because without the dark, without the dark, there is no light, and vice versa. So that's in duality too. So we're all of it in wholeness, right? It's all in that separation illusion. And so when we start talking about something that is deemed acceptable or good, right? That's something, good morning, Gloria. That's something that is completely based in an idea from the ego of what is good, right? What is bad. So many, like what the biggest practice is that we have gotten so embedded within us, like in terms of our well-being and our presence and what we do in this world as we are embodied, is based on some idea of what is good and what is bad. And typically that comes from what? And this is all in duality. And this typically comes from A, what you're brought up with, B, what your peers say, what your family says, what your environment says. And so when we come into this place of remembrance and we focus and commit ourselves to remembering ourselves as the divine, one of the biggest things for us to do is to release and let go of our ideas of good and bad, and to recognize that good and bad are subjective to the individual. So you can ask 10 different people if something is good or bad, and you can get 10 different responses, right? Yeah, or an authority figure, right? Like a doctor or politicians or institutions, our government, expert scientists or whatever. Like, and we say, okay, well, we've gotten into this place of learning. It's a learned and something that we've accepted to say, okay, in duality and the idea of having the ability for exclusion, that would mean that somebody could know more than I could, and that they would know more about me, and that I couldn't possibly know as much about myself as they could tell me, right? So that's a lot of, so it's a lot to process. It's a lot to start living, right? And this is what we've been talking about for, like I said, years and decades, whatever. And part of the practice is, like I said, coming to this place of unconditional self-love. And when we do that, it is to transcend the judgment of what's good and bad, because we hold against ourselves what we believe is bad. Because what do we hear from our parents, from our teachers, from, belief systems? Oh, what this makes you good or this makes you evil. You're such a good person. Be a good girl. Be a good boy, right? We say that all the time. And then we impart punishment for what we consider individually as bad. And so we're brought up with this, and it's a constant thing. Right? And what we have, like, what's good and what's bad, go to jail. If it's bad, go, if it's good, get a medal, all these kind of things. Well, if you look at any one situation by two different sets of eyes, you're going to have a completely different perception as to whether it was good or bad or neutral or whatever. Again, because it's subjective. And so in the practice of realization and coming into our own consciousness and our own remembrance is to transcend those exclusions, to say in the wholeness of divinity, right? Everything is beautiful and perfect, right? And even what we've deemed to be the darkness or the bad or whatever. And then we also start to realize the only journey, good morning, Laurel, the only journey, good morning, Kathy, the only journey that I am responsible for is my own. I am here as a facet of the divine. I have embodied myself to be this piece and facet, this perfect symphonic note, to fulfill that note. And that is my business as I am embodied as me, right? And so, like, you embodied as you is your business. It's your journey. And so we're going to be no two people, no two facets, no two pieces of consciousness in this multiverse will be in the exact same place at the exact same time, vibrationally, in the same space, in the same idea, in the same creation. It's all individual as much as it is whole. And when we start to grasp that, then our entire experience changes in how we attend to things in life as we're embodied here, and how we, on how we deal with other people. And when we start to come to a place, so here's the thing. We talk about, oh, well, don't, one of the things we've been talking about from the spiritual perspective for years is this. It is okay. Good morning, Nirmala. It is okay to put yourself first, because you are the one you came here to be. And so, like I said, your journey is your business. And one of the first things I say to people when I work with them, we talk about this in Trinity all the time, is it is none of your business what other people think of you, because what they think of you is where they are. Just like what you think of other people is where you are. It has nothing to do with them. So we talk about this from a spiritual standpoint, and we've been talking about it, and we know it, but we still are so influenced in general by the motivation to please others, to have others like us and approve of us, to have them think of us as good. And so, and to avoid people thinking us as bad. That's sometimes even more of a motivation, propulsion. And that's a duality-based propulsion. So thank you, Nirmala. So the thing is, so when we come to the place of unconditional self-love, which means I have looked into the deepest depths of my darkness, and I have accepted it as fully divine and perfect in the depths of my light, to the height of my light, or however you want to call it, because it's all what was created in duality, in my wholeness. then we start to accept ourselves as what we are, right? And where we are. And when we do that, we can then accept everyone else around us as who they are and where they are. And by the way, what presents is completely perfect for each individual. So one of the most challenging things that we have, and like I said, I'm putting aside everything that's happened in this 3-day world for the past several months. I'm talking about before this, right? This is what we've been talking about, and to sort of lay the groundwork, what we're talking about today. So one of the most challenging things is because we are so programmed. We program ourselves to disempower ourselves, to put our worth and our value outside of us, to say that I have to work at it, that I have to attain it, and that I am not innately worthy, so I have to prove myself. And so that way I have to have others approve of me, which means that my motivations will be to please other people, which is weird, sort of, well, weird, that's a judgment. When you start thinking about, well, but if what other people think of me is not where I am, but where they are, then how can I judge myself based on where they are? That makes no sense, right, on the journey. and when you start looking at that, it's like, okay, so the more you come into acceptance for yourself to say, okay, I am pretty confident with who I am. I step with confidence into my divine purpose and fully embody my divinity and everything else. And I accept it all as whole and perfect, my darkness as well as my light. And when I start to do that, guess what? The acceptance happens. Then I stop depending, and I start quitting the addiction to have others tell me I'm good, or to give approval of me, or to say, oh, what a great person that is, and all that kind of stuff. Because I know that I am innately worthy, because I am always divine. I am always the divine. I created myself to come here, as I understand it, to, be embodied this way for this set of lessons, and to share my facet as a reflection to other facets also, right? So what we talk about a lot is how, when we stand in that power, when we stand in that authenticity, because that's what our authenticity truly is standing there unapologetically as yourself, an unconditional self-love, to say, this is me. I don't need your approval. I love you because I love me. And when I love me, I can't do anything but love everybody around us, because I know they're all facets of the divine and me as well. So, and so I can't do anything but love myself and love your journey. So Sarah says, I think most people don't include the shadow or darkness in the definition of divinity. That's true, because everybody talks about is, oh, like, turn up my light and da 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 da. Well, when we turn up our light, we increase the depths of our darkness, right? When we turn up our wholeness, then we sort of dissolve it both to become that divine being and that consciousness, right? Yeah, stand in your allness. So anyway, so when we do that, there is nothing that for us to do except love and accept and expect the fierce authenticity of everyone and everything around us. When we come to that place of unconditional self-love, that we can stand in that authenticity, because I then don't need anything. I don't believe that I need anything or anyone to fill a hole or to approve of me, or pat me on the back or love me, because I already love myself and I don't feel like I have any holes. And that's why when we talk about that, and like, sometimes it's frustrating because people just sort of shrug it off saying, oh yeah, I do that. And it's like, but that is our core lesson to come into remembrance, is that acceptance of the whole, acceptance of the depth of our darkness as much as our light, and then acceptance of ourself as divine, because that's when we fully step into it. So we've been talking about that, and we start to do these things in practical terms, and this is why I call this living the shift. I love the word facet. Reminds me of a diamond. I know, that's Kathy. That's why I use it, the word facet, because that's what I always think of as this, multifaceted, bajillion, multifaceted, multidimensional, better than a diamond kind of thing. So, so when we get to that place, then we can't do anything but see everybody as perfect and divine, right? And then we start seeing things differently, right? And we start acting differently. Because here's the thing, if I am like the only thing that's my business is truly my journey, my own journey as this facet that I have created, then I know everything, of course, for me to do and be. And I begin to trust my guidance. And that's where we trust that the higher consciousness will come in and will and always give us the clear path, right? The clear choice. And when we talk, people always ask, well, how do you discern? Well, when you are coming into that place of unconditional self-love, the voice becomes clearer, and then you don't doubt it, because the doubt is the ego. When the ego says, oh, well, I'm getting to do this, but this feels really uncomfortable. Uncomfortable comes from the ego. Anxiety, fear comes from the ego. Anger comes from the ego. And so that's how you can discern. And it's like, okay, but this clear voice said, do this, be this, and when we trust that, the discomfort typically comes from the ego. And then so it's for us to trust that voice over everything else, to step into it, no matter how uncomfortable it makes us, and to trust it every step of the way. And so that's been the practice that many of us have been, like getting ourselves, habituated in for years now, some months, some years, some decades, because we're in this practice run. Right. So, okay, well, now let's talk about the last couple months. We're in this practice run. And, people might laugh when I say this practice run, but my understanding is, the way I feel, and many of us feel, is that there's something really even bigger around the corner that we can't even put in context for right now. And that this is sort of a trial run on us getting to a place and being able to really apply that within ourselves. So go back to several months ago, right? Before all this craziness happened, and we're talking it, and so we're starting to get into that practice, and we're getting into that habit, and to say, okay, well, I'm okay with my mother, my father, my kids, my husband, my wife judging me. I'm okay with this, I'm okay with that. I'm staying true in my heart to what my guidance is giving me, and where I know my authenticity is. And that was a challenge for many. That's what I work with. So that's pretty much what I work with everybody about doing. And so, okay. And then the next step beyond that becomes, okay, well, I know what to do for me to get me into harmonization. And some people call it alignment. Some people call it wellness and flow. It doesn't matter what we call it. It's to recognize our wholeness, to say, okay, to be in that place of wholeness as I'm continuously shifting to remember and letting go of separation piece by piece, right? Letting go of the existence and consciousness and separation piece by piece. As I'm doing that, I start to remember, wait, so my sickness or illness or disease or chronic stuff, that all had to do with my unalignment or my disharmony with myself. And many times, most times, those have all had to do with giving away our power and our authenticity and internalizing toxicity, or things that don't align with our authentic divine self. And so when we work in energy healing and, quantum physics and everything else, we start looking at, that's what is the path to what we call wellness, is that alignment and harmonization with our authenticity. Because the more we take off these shields of things that we believe we have to carry, or the burdens that we believe we have to carry to make ourselves valuable or worthy, to make ourselves love worthy, because we believe we have to prove it and have others love us or tell us that they love us for us to believe it of ourselves. The more we come into that place of loving ourselves, the more we shed those burdens, and the more we come into natural alignment with ourselves, which then, by the way, what happens? We get better. The illness goes away. The injury goes away. The disease goes away. And so then we naturally just shift and exist in this completely different vibration where that kind of stuff just doesn't even exist. All right. And so when we, and there are people on here live, and I know who will watch it later, who we all understand this. And so, then the next step is this. Well, do I have to listen to what a doctor says? Well, if my guidance says differently, no. If my guidance says to do this, instead, I have had personally, and I don't talk about this a lot, I've personally had a number of situations come up over the past decade alone, mostly in the first couple of years of that decade ago, where I was guided to do not call a doctor, do not do this, do not ask anybody else. You will shift this yourself, to help push myself get to a place. And it wasn't the ego saying it. It was actually higher consciousness going, you will do this. Of course you can. And so there were some pretty intense situations, but what we believe intrinsically, which is something I've been exploring this past week, is that we have to practice something to master it, which we don't, but we believe we do. And so the more we come into consciousness, the more we can let go of that. So I've been practicing that, which means that what's happened is I had some really heavy duty stuff in the beginning of actively doing all this. So that now, guess what? I worked through those things, and yet the ego considered them hell at the time, but I released them, I resolved them, I came into better harmonization and alignment within myself so that they did not exist in my reality anymore. And things that were considered chronic haven't come back. No need, right? And so I don't talk about that much because to me, it's not part of my reality anymore. So I forget about it. But this is relevant in terms of saying, yeah. And there were some weird things that came into my guidance. It was like, yeah, don't do this, what everybody's saying you should do, but do this instead. Do this. But what about this? No, do this. That would be guidance. And when I finally would do this, whatever it was, I have some really funny stories with that too. It was like, oh, cleared up like that. Gone. Nothing that you could find anywhere anybody would say or whatever. And that's when we become leaders and in ourselves and our own journey, right? It's when we come at peace, because the more that starts to happen and we come into practice because we believe we have to practice, right? The more we can trust, because the ego says, well, I can't trust unless I see proof, right? So the more we start to practice that and say, okay, well, I'm going to do this. I'm going to take this as my exercise to, really trust my guidance over everything else and pick something little. And I'm not going to listen to what other people tell me or what Google says or whatever. I'm going to just listen to what guidance says, even if it sounds really bizarre, really different. The more you do that, and then the more you see how easily, how once you can work through those, right, shift through them to a place of alignment and ease and flow so that they release from your reality, the more you begin, the more that trust really becomes anchored in. And then the ego does start to step back more, because the ego's like, okay, yeah, okay, yep, I trust. So when you do that, you stop depending on what other people say. You stop depending on, having to go to the doctor or, go to this person or this scientist or this, because guidance always leads you where it is for you to be for your journey. And so, it's funny to shove all this in a half hour. So it's like, wow, keep on rolling. Because that alone is something that I've worked with many on. I mean, myself, we work on this constantly to remember, to let go. What we're doing is we're not learning, we're letting go of the things that we're limiting ourselves with by only saying, I have to do this to be a good person, even though our guidance is saying, do this. So, we look at then the definition of what's good, right? Before the last several months, there was a lot of people who I know when we would talk about this, and some people would say, oh, well, you're not compassionate because you don't have, you're not compassionate because of how you don't, get dramatic about a situation with somebody or whatever. And my response to that has been, oh, no, I always hold a space of love. Of course, love and respect for your journey. Absolutely, I hold that space. And whatever you'll accept with me to remember within yourself to shift it so that you can finish that lesson, right? I don't look at death as a bad thing. Death is just a graduation. Birth and death are the same thing. It's just where you're looking from in perspective. And so, you know, you start saying, okay, so then there are times when I have the ego says, oh, to be a good person, I should help this person. To be a good person, I should do this. And then guidance says, do this or don't do this. And my understanding with that is sometimes by helping someone, right? By helping someone, what we believe is helping to be a good person or whatever, we perpetuate a lesson that that individual came here to learn because we prevent them from learning it themselves. Their journey is their own. So if the guidance is no, don't help them, they must, you know, it's for them to, it is for, not must, it is for them to come to that realization on their own, to come to that ability on their own or remembrance. Or this is for you to do, which might be very different from what somebody would expect. So look at that from this perspective, right? When we're looking at that to say, okay, that's true. You know, I was talking to somebody once, one of my clients who was very, very wealthy. And she said she felt guilty for her wealth because of the way she was brought up and everything else. And she goes, oh, and I can't give enough. And I, you know, send stuff all over the world and I do this and I never feel like it's enough. And I said, why do you feel guilty? Why are you not taking that energy and the way you've turned that around in your life and using that to do like workshops on abundance and prosperity? You know, like you can do that. And then she's like, well, you know, I just feel like I'm not doing enough. And there's all these poor people and da-da-da. And I said, wait, stop. I said, what if there's a person you come across and they're, you know, destitute, they're living on the street and now, or whatever, right? They just can't seem to get it together. And your ego's compulsion to make yourself feel better about yourself, because that's what we do, right? And I'm not saying that with judgment, this is the reality, is we do things for others most often to feel good about ourselves because we don't believe we're innately good, blah, 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 right? Connect to all that. But then, unless we come from a place of unconditional love and guidance says, do this, great, then you help them. If I said, so say you came across this person and they, in another life, were some ruler somewhere, filthy rich, and totally abused their power. They abused the wealth that they had, and then they sort of cursed themselves on leaving, or felt guilty about it, or felt badly, and they have decided to believe that money is bad. They've decided to believe that if they have money, that they will abuse their power and hurt other people instead of resolving that lesson within themselves. And that's their journey. That's fine. But if they believe that, you could give them $1 million and it would flow right through their fingers and be gone tomorrow. And then they'll be back in the same exact place. So if you come across it and your egoic compulsion is, oh, I've got to help them, right? If you don't stop, do you ever stop and ask your guidance, is it for me to help them? And the person was like, no. And I said, well, that's the first step, because you'll be surprised how many times the higher self, the consciousness says, no, it's for them to do themselves. Or you might be guided to do it a different way. Help too much, then you create dependence and stunt that person's growth. Exactly. So we're doing all that, right? And in the meantime, we're looking around us and we have so many things going on. We don't treat our bodies well. And we have gotten to a place where we don't treat our bodies well because we become so externally dependent on comfort, on avoiding our dark side and avoiding our darkness, avoiding the judgment, facing the judgment that we have of our darkness, that we externalize all this stuff. We don't believe we're good people. We don't believe we're divine. So therefore we do all these things that are probably not aligned or harmonized with our authentic self. So we can get very physical about that. We can talk about, food and fast food and heart disease. We can talk about, just choices that don't align with that authenticity. And by the way, once we get to a certain vibration, it doesn't matter what we put in our bodies, it's going to change vibration anyway, but most aren't that vibration. There are all these different bands of vibration. So I can do something one way and you can do it a different way. We can have two different two completely different results because of where we are vibrationally and on our individual journeys. Does it make one of us right and one of us wrong? It does not. It doesn't. So it doesn't make one of us good and one of us bad either. That's the thing for us to learn here, or not learn, but to remember. And when we start to get to this place of saying, okay, so so let's just take this little string here. Oh, we're obviously going over 30 minutes today because this is really important. But say, okay, I feel bad about myself. I judge myself. I don't believe I'm good enough. I believe what all the ads say and what the world says, and that I have to be this weight or this shape or this size, and I have to be this smart or do this or be in this kind of situation. And I am not that. So therefore, I am not worthy. Therefore, everything that I should do should be to prove that I'm worthy and externalize it and make and depend on other people to do that. Well, then there's this friction inside of us because we know that our authenticity is being squelched, and yet we ignore it. The more we ignore it, the more we create toxicity within us. We create friction, and then what do? We turn to things like food and things that are not aligned and harmonized, and I'm just talking about in ways that are in alignment and harmonization of our authentic self. And then that's what we call self-sabotaging behavior. And, we act badly to people and because then we believe that's how, that's what we are. And then we try to blame them. And it sounds ridiculous when it comes out of somebody's mouth, but it's actually, that's what we do. And there's no judgment in this. Like I said, I've worked with thousands of people over the past 10 years. It is, there more than 1,000 people. There's so many different presentations. It's all the same thing. It's all coming down to, I always say it's like 2 steps to unworthiness, right? So our practice in spiritual consciousness is to come to this place of getting transcendent to good or bad, to be in a place to see the wholeness, to remember the wholeness, to know that I'm innately divine and whole, and to focus my efforts inside of me to come to this place of unconditional self-love, to accept my dark side and love it just as much as my light side. To say, without the depth of my dark, I wouldn't have the brightness of my light, and I wouldn't have all the colors and rainbow of facets and depths in between. And look at what a beautiful facet I've created of myself in this creation. So when we do that, right, then our disease and our illness goes away. We don't become even susceptible to being sick. And by the way, even if something does come through our energy field, when we know how to work through it and flow through it in a way that is just easy. Yeah. And it's just an easy way. And then we don't get sick anymore. Then you don't worry about, oh, is this contagious? Is not contagious? And I've said this so many times that I could, when you get to that place, you could walk through a field of people with a bubonic plague and not worry, and have them coughing and sneezing and whatever all over you, and not worry about it because you won't get sick. Yes, you can do that. You can totally do that. I mean, if you want to go biblical, you have Jesus and the lepers, right? That kind of stuff. But there's 100,000 other examples. But I have worked with so many sick people over the years that I've been doing this full time, and I've never gotten sick from them because it's not my sickness to take on. I've shifted within myself the need to not need to do that, right? I don't need to be sick to be a part of humanity. I don't need to be sick to be connected to somebody or get sickness or whatever. I choose to connect from love and joy and wholeness and authenticity. And when we get to that place, then all of this other stuff, all of this bickering, the what's right and what's wrong becomes totally irrelevant because only you know what is for you in your guidance. And the job for us is to come to that place of fierce authenticity, a fierce and complete trust of what comes from inside, so that nothing will deter you from your path in that guidance. And so what we've been getting, many of us for years have been getting, be the calm in the storm, be the center in the chaos. That's what being the center in the chaos is. And it's not judging. It's not saying, oh, because you're doing this or you're not doing this, you're a bad person. I mean, you see it all over the place right now. Both, whatever polarity you want to pick, both sides of the polarity. Well, if you're not doing this, you're a bad person, right? How much you see out there, oh, do this to be a good person, to do this for your neighbors. You're not ever doing anything for your neighbors. You're doing it for yourself innately, to feel good about yourself, to say that, you care about others. When I care about myself, I'm strong in my own guidance. And when my guidance is to do something or do something else, then that's what I do. And what a great way when you hold that space of love and authenticity to be the example for others to do the same within themselves, to say you can do this too. I've had, others in my reality for years who are still very immersed in sickness and illness and everything else. And it's funny because I just don't have that discussion. It's not something that I talk about. It's not something I choose to create. I just sort of accept what they say and whatever. And then it was funny, one time I was talking to this one particular person and they were talking to another person that we have run into, and they said, oh, well, yeah. And then right away she talked to the person we ran into, and they start talking about their ailments, and I had nothing to say. And she goes, oh yeah, well, she doesn't have that in her reality. And I was like, oh wow, she actually sees that. Yeah, she doesn't get sick and da-da-da. And it's like, that's true. I don't. That's where we get to, right? And if I do, it's not even really it's something that passes through, and then there's something for me to look at if I allowed it to be a mirror or a message within my body. So I mean, like I said, a room full of people who are contagious and never get anything. And that's okay. People say, oh, well, don't be a carrier and give it to them. It's like, but if that's not my purpose, and that's not my purpose, and it is, and if it is, it is. And so what if all of this extreme fear, right? Fear is from the ego, and it gives away its power to say, take care of me, to make me feel safe, right? Because I don't believe I'm able to do that myself. So, but what if all this fear, and then giving away the power to let others tell you how to be safe over what your guidance tells you to do to continue on your journey, right? What if doing all that prevents a vast amount of people from fulfilling their journeys and lessons and coming to their own authenticity here now today? What if? What if by everybody saying, do this for the common good, for everybody else, don't listen to your guidance, listen to what these people say or this group says or whatever. What if by doing that, or don't do this based on whatever, what if by doing that, we are just pushing ourselves to perpetuate this and recreate it at a bigger scale so that we have to do it again until we finally break and say, I'm just going to do this through my guidance, through my own inner knowing, and come to a place of trust, because we will do that until we finally do. My understanding is that's what we're going to do until we get there. And so I would rather do that now than later as it gets bigger. So keep that in mind. That's what this is about. Look at your motivations. Look at where you are about yourself, right? Do you believe that you know more about yourself than your doctor? Do you know that? And sometimes you're guided, go to the doctor. Sometimes you are guided. Like when you get into the guidance, go to the doctor. Sometimes you're guided, go do this. It's easy. And it's not that you cannot change it yourself. It's that sometimes it's just easier and faster to do this. But it's to get to that place of knowing the difference first, right? And so that's something to look at. Look at where you're judging people and saying you're good or bad. They're good or bad, or they're wrong because they should be doing this for the good of the many, or they shouldn't be doing this for the good of the many, or whatever. Look at your own judgments to say, this is where there's for me to look at, and what is there within myself, within my own darkness, that I still judge? What is there for me to grasp onto and look in the bigger picture to see, where was the lesson? What was the catalyst for this dark side to me? What did it create in the light side? What was my propulsion from that, right? So the more we do that, the more this will resolve more quickly, all of this. so that we don't have to do it again. We are right now pretty immersed in it. So that's why I got this. There was this urgency to really talk about this, and I've really sort of been biting back a little bit. But step back before you shame anybody. Shaming is ego. Blaming is ego. And look at, okay, so if I'm guided to do this, and by the way, even if you're guided to do something, it doesn't mean that everybody else should be doing the same thing. That's the biggest thing. Like if somebody's guided to do one thing and somebody's guided to do the opposite, that doesn't make either one wrong. It makes them what is right for their situation. And that is for us in higher consciousness to remember. You are a perfect facet of the divine, just like I am. I honor you like I honor myself. And to do that is for me to let you have your own journey, just like I have my own. And by the way, what I think of your journey is none of your business, because it's where I am, and where you, what you think of me on my journey is none of your business, none of my business, because that's where you are. So if we just held on to that and really applied it where we are now, that would be really the biggest lesson for us to learn. And then we can shift right beyond this and get on to much happier things. So that's it. That was it. We went over today. So something to look at all those judgments before you step forward and shame or blame or feel bad or do something based on what other people sort of push you into or whatever. Look at your own authenticity. Look at your own spiritual strength of remembrance. And if you need to, find a way to go within to look at that and to be productive about it. And it's not just meditating to quiet the chatter, though that is the first step. There's a lot that we can do that's so much easier. And Sarah Evignoni, who's on here, she and I do our podcast on Monday, Ascended World, and we're putting together a program right now on immunity consciousness, which is all about this. So, but this is where we start. So look at that this week. And because when we get to that place, then there is nothing to worry about in terms of sickness or anything. Like I was saying before, it just doesn't happen. So look at all that this week. Take a baby step, change something. Instead of saying something, bite your lip, step back and say, oh, look, I didn't know I had that. I didn't know I had that judgment before. Oh, okay. Where's that coming from? And what is it within myself that I don't judge? If I looked at the darkest parts of myself right now, what would I see if I allowed myself to do that? Why am I afraid? Well, because I'm afraid of all those things that we talked about earlier. So you can call me. I have a great program that I can help you with. But I'm just saying there's many ways of doing it. But first, commit yourself to yourself, because the whole thing is not depending on somebody else to tell you how to do it. It is actually coming to a place of asking and letting it come in front of you and say, okay, is this for me to remember me without the dependence on that eventually, but then just sort of as tools and steps along the way. So have a great week on this very light topic that we've had. We'll see you next time on Living the Shift. This is Angela Coulter signing out. Have a good one.